last couple of years, I've been talking about women up here, and as fascinating a topic as we are, right, fellas, I thought I'd just use that as a stepping stone this time around, because I've been studying a lot of mythology, really, focusing on women's place in them, the goddesses, the sacrifices, all that fun stuff. And really, I've been focusing on their similar across traditions and when they're different. Take fertility, for example. In the West, we see a lot of fertility goddesses, but in the East, you often find fertility gods. And it's easy for a silly little modern person to look at this and say it's just very arbitrary. There's no real deeper rhyme or reason as to why they decide to have assign it masculine or feminine. It's just preference. And no, that's a gross oversimplification of these traditions and their cultures, because really what they're doing is recognizing something true about the ways in which reality manifests itself. So if you look at the West, say the Greeks, you find a lot of fertility goddesses, because over here we're looking at that which bears fruit, what bears out the transformation of life. But in the East, the Hittites, the Japanese, even the Aztec, if you want to lump that in, you find a lot of fertility gods, because over there we're looking at what causes a flower to turn into a fruit, what causes the transformation of life to begin. And so they are recognizing the fertile versus what fertilizes, the passive and the active, the feminine and the masculine, and the marriage of which brings about new life, this is a truth that we humans are most fractally distilled points of, and dismissing these as arbitrary, well, you become uprooted from that truth and untethered from the reality, and you end up with silly ideas like, oh yeah, man can give birth. Silly, but also destructive. And so the best way to avoid something like that is to not throw out traditions that you have. However, you can't hold on to every single little thing that comes along, because as a descendant from such savages, I'm glad the Aztecs aren't around anymore, because I don't like it when you're sacrificing them to these gods, or men or children for that matter. So we have a small predicament. What do we hold on to, and what do we give up? And the good news is, tradition is very adaptive. It's good at casting off what is unsustainable. And to complement that, progress is very conservative, because if you change too much too fast, then you do become lost and untethered. If you look at something like genetic mutations, if I might step into a past life that I can't decide, if you look at genetic mutations, you change too much and too fast, then you just don't have any more viable genetic code left. Your proteins don't fold correctly. You don't come to be. Forget about becoming lost, you aren't. And the odds of you creating a new set of genetic code that is viable, just a small sequence of it, there is nothing in the universe that compares to it. There aren't enough atoms in the universe to count the ways in which you will fail to do so. And yet, we do progress. It does still happen. So let me step into my current life now with literature. I didn't know what to do with literature when I first decided to pursue it. I was just a fool following my passion. And I came to realize that I wasn't supposed to know what to do with literature, because the postmodern bent in the 90s sort of meant to untether you, make you lost. Because there's really no scientific method to it. It's cherry-picked data, say whatever you want about it. Which upset me and has been trained as a scientist for some time, because the whole point of the scientific endeavor is to curiously pursue truth. And that's why I got into book publishing. I make books now, working on textbooks at the moment. And it's Western Civ, the progress of it through the ages. What it's built off of, this truth that it's rooted in, and that's also why I decided to come to Ralston, because once you start to recognize that there is a solid tradition, that all these things are seated in, then you begin to learn how best to pick it up, to make it your own. It's not just another, there it is up on the shelf. No, take it down, learn it, bring it forward if you can, maybe even move beyond it, because that's what we're supposed to do, while holding on to the best parts of it. The question is, how do we do that? So let's look at poetry. Let's start with Homer, okay? So, back in the day, Homer is making epic poetry. And really, he just made the perfect things. You all hear Conlon, everything is in Homer. You don't need anything else besides that. You have the Odyssey, we're done. But then some little freak comes along to write in Latin, gross, and he writes the Aeneid. Virgil makes the Aeneid, which is amazing. It's another incredible feat. Homer still did it better, but he still does it. And then a little weirdo decides to write in Italian, weird, and he makes the comedy. Dante makes comedy, right? He doesn't just make the comedy, he makes a new perfect thing. He makes Terza Lima. And no one could have ever imagined something like that, and yet he's done it, okay? Let's quickly just slide over into another poetic tradition that was emerging at that time, sonnets. Thank you, Kate, for bringing that up earlier. So sonnets developed out of the Italian courts in, I think, the 13th century. And there are a bunch of poets running around and making their poems who nobody remembers anymore. And they're having a grand old time until Petrarch came along and perfected the sonnet. We know he perfected the sonnet because we named it after him. Petrarch's sonnet. So you have, he says, I'm going to make it 14 lines. I have a pentameter. It's going to have alternating rhyming. It's going to have octave, sestet. And in the sestet, there's a little bit of weirdness that happens there. It could be C, D, C, D, C, D, but it could also be C, D, E, C, D, E. But Europeans are wiggly, right? So he's done. We have it. Over, right? No, we're not over. Because then Howard makes the English sonnet, better known as the Shakespearean sonnet. Why don't we call it the Howard? I don't know what it is. That sonnet? Because again, there are a bunch of names that we forget over time that aren't as important, but we got Shakespeare. Shakespeare not only takes the sonnet, and we have now quatrains, couplet. He then takes that and makes what I'm going to say is the perfect line of poetry in the English language. What is it? I'm going to tell you, don't worry about it. So I'm going to say that the first line, sonnet number 12, okay? When I do count the clock that tells the time. Perfect. Why? Well, first of all, perfect iambic pentameter. When I do count the clock that tells the time. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Beautiful. Number 2, it sounds like what it's talking about. How dare he? When I do count the clock that tells the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. When I do count the clock that tells the time. Oh. So, that's 2. Number 3, the entire poem is summed up in that first line. Not all the sonnets do that, but this one does. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves borne on the air with white and bristly beard, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the ways of time must go, since sweets and beauties to themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing against time's side can make defense, save breed to brave him when he take thee hence. The endless, relentless march of time across everyone and everything, when I do count the clock that tells the time, tick-tock, on and on and on, and it never stops. Right? Perfect. So we're done, right? There's nothing else after that, surely. Tradition, you're just repeating the same thing over and over and over again, right? No, there's more. Really? Stop. I'm getting sorry. So, we have, it took a few hundred years for us to get from Petrarch to Shakespeare. I'm going to say it takes another few hundred years for us to get the next perfect thing. Who done it? I'm going to tell you. So, I'm going to say that Tolkien, okay, he made the perfect combination of rhyme and meter in his poem Errantry from his Lord of the Rings series. Okay, I'm going to say just the first 8 lines because it's a long poem. I want you to try and hear what's happening in it, because he never wrote another one again like this again, and you're going to see why. So, there was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola to wander in, and had in her a load of yellow oranges and porridge for his provender. He perfumed her with marjoram and cardamom and lavender. What on God's green earth has he done? What is that? Let's look at the first line. Okay, what's the meter? There was a merry passenger. 8. He's already broken the rule. Doesn't he know we're pentameter people? Right? So he's put it now in 4/4. He's made it tetrameter. He's kept the iambs, but there's something strange about them. We're going to get back to that in a second. So what's the rhyme scheme on this sucker? There are some ending rhymes. It's a lot of lavender, messenger, but it's not every line. It alternates. It alternates with a staggered rhyme with the sixth and second syllable. So the sixth syllable will rhyme with the second syllable of the following line. There was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola to wander in, and had in her a load of yellow oranges and porridge for his provender. And because of that, it adds an additional emphasis on the second and sixth syllable. You can't help but add it every single time, and you can't help but bounce along with it. Really, you can't help but sing it, because I think he's made music, honestly. Especially from the Lord of the Rings, it being sung into existence, right? So, he's made music, but he's not a musician. He wasn't trained as a musician. He came from a musical family. He married a classically trained pianist, but he's not a musician. However, if you're married to a classically trained pianist, you're going to hear a lot of Bach and Beethoven. And if you listen to music in the West, you're going to become familiar with this tradition of the downbeat. So the downbeat gets additional emphasis in music. So 1 and 3, da, 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 da. Okay, it trails off, da, 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 da. But he said, I have iams, I'm flipping it, so he puts it on the offbeat instead. So he's made it in 4/4. Most common time signature in the West, aside from, I think, performance, I think. So he flips it, so instead it's da 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 da. There was a merry passenger, a messenger, a merry. You can't help but bounce it. It's beautiful, it's perfect, but he's broken all these rules, right? What gave him the right to do that? What gave him, Shakespeare, Dante, Petrarch, what gave any of them the right? Okay? I'm going to quote another classically trained pianist, Lady Gaga. So, because she's a classically trained pianist, she knows Bach, she knows Beethoven, and she's also quite an accomplished jazz performer. And she has said, I'm paraphrasing, before you ever dare try and improvise on a piece of music, Gershwin, for example, you better know the ink on the page. You have to know what it is. You need to know where it came from, or else you're not going to know where anybody's been. You're not going to know where you're going. What's the chance that the next step you take, if you don't know where somebody's been, it's going to be that same spot that we should have just left behind, right? Where you walk off a cliff and you're not holding on to anything, okay? So all of these people were deep studiers and admirers of the traditions they were in, okay? Over and over again, practicing again and again, plenty of failures, and eventually, with great time and effort, they became masters of it, right? Only then were they able to approach these traditions with the care necessary to break these rules, just not tear it down and throw everything out, just break them, like when you break a bone, you don't get it set soon enough, you need to break it again to set it true. It's the same thing, they're breaking it just enough to bring it just that little bit farther forward until they get, eventually you get a Shakespeare, you get, right? And it might not be you that does it, right? This business learning tradition here at Ralston, like I was in the first class, right? First class Ralston. And I knew I wasn't gonna get the Ralston experience. I knew that was gonna come later. But I could add a pebble to the footpath to let somebody put the next stepping stone down, right? And that's sort of what it's all about. You're trying to recognize, hopefully become masters of your work, which you're all going to be once you graduate, right? So that you can recognize that it's better for you than whoever left it to you, right? It was just that much better. And maybe I can leave it that much better for the next person that comes after me. Because that's your job, right? You have to recognize, maybe it's not me, but somebody, one of us, is gonna do it. We're gonna reach the next perfect thing. And I believe that is the trajectory of tradition. Thank you.